All right, good afternoon, everyone. Well, welcome everyone. We're here March 5th, 2021, our Cupertino Legislative Action Committee.
Thank you very much, Rick, and to all of you on the board for having me here today. And Anjali, good to see you again. You know, over the last couple of years, you two have been really inviting me and including me wherever possible and things, and I appreciate that very much. And I always say to folks, especially folks active in the community and chambers and in other organizations, please don't assume that we know what's happening next. It was interesting listening to Ms. Fang, the city manager, talk about some of the events that are upcoming or some of the things going on, ways to be involved. We want to continue to hear about that. There's times when we feel like we're getting inundated, you know, with events and invitations in a district of 1 million people, and the West Valley cities and the city of San Jose is a lot of ground to cover, but there's a lot of things we just don't hear about. And frankly, having moved from the Board of Supervisors to the state Senate, even our district office, even though it's, you know, Senator Bell's former office, you know, folks haven't necessarily made the connection that this is where you call or reach out to reach Senator Cortese or his staff. So it's great. I'm glad that Celeste is with us. And of course, she's just one of just a couple of folks two in the Capitol and one in the district office, who have, you know, stayed on, so to speak. And we're really pleased to have her because she's so knowledgeable about the district. She's spending a ton of time, you know, helping out with areas that frankly are kind of breakdowns at the state level that Senator Bell was dealing with too. But, you know, much of it, elected officials have sort of had to jump in, whether in the assembly level or the state level, or even the county supervisors and city council members can attest, to try to handle calls from people right now who need help with landlord tenant issues or business support issues, or particularly EDD issues where there's been just a huge breakdown, as you know. So Celeste is right on top of all that. She's part of a really excellent team that we've been able to put together. You know, for me, I appreciate the introduction, Rick. That was a great way to do the introduction, perhaps. I certainly appreciate that more than, you know, some recital of many areas that I've worked in or things that I've done. But it's fortunate for me on the issues side that I've worked in the private sector full-time, more than full-time, for all of you private sector folks. So you know that there's no such thing as a 40-hour week when you're running your own business or investing or trying to employ other people. It's around the clock 7 days a week. And I did that until I was 45 years old, and moved on finally to a full-time position on the San Jose City Council at that point. I had served as a school board member for 8 years, and that has turned out to be an invaluable experience in Sacramento, especially right now when we're trying to get schools reopened and there's any number of issues facing our education system. But I wanted you to know that, you know, even to this day, my relationship to my own business portfolio, my own real estate investments, and the business community, I think remains strong, and is also invaluable lived experience and relationships that I try to put into good use every single day in Sacramento, and every single day in this job. You know, on the Board of Supervisors for the last dozen years, after that 8 years on the city council, I, you know, really dealt with a lot of the same issues that you're seeing at the forefront right now. COVID aside for a moment, issues around environment and climate, issues around safety net services, issues around our housing crisis, and what's the appropriate way to deal with that. You know, these are issues. Justice reform, education, you know, has that common thread that involves, you know, even county government, and of course, to some degree, municipal government. To some degree, it affects all of us, right? Whether you're talking about a community college system like that Deanne's is a part of, or the remainder of the system, there's no disconnecting it from local government or from our local business community. So Those are all issues I had a great opportunity to work on as a member of the Board of Supervisors. So on the issue side, I feel like, I've landed on my feet, and, despite the difficulties, the logistical challenges of trying to do business right now, with all the shutdowns and with the capital really reduced down to a skeleton kind of staffing, we're still getting a lot done, and I'm at least not playing catch up on issues, right? I know those. But even though, coming back to Rick's introduction, even though I've had a lot of experience in a lot of areas, and I just touched upon some more of that, procedure is different in Sacramento, much different than in local government, and much different, frankly, than the way we make decisions at chambers of commerce or in local businesses. In any kind of businesses, even global businesses are run differently. Frankly, a board of supervisors is kind of like a board of directors of a very large corporation. In Santa Clara County, the county employs over 22,000 people, 40 departments and agencies. It has a CEO. We kind of call him county executive for short, or county exec. So the board is almost in a corporate role. If you really look at what cities do, and our city manager will attest to it, it's a municipal corporation. I mean, she's running a business-like operation, really a business operation, purely speaking, except that it's in the public sector. So that the basic rules of engagement, there's a few people on your board. If they make a decision, that decision becomes policy or becomes the way you do business, and the management follows suit, right? Even in the chamber, we do things that way. At the state, we have this bicameral system that's much more like the federal government, as you know, in the sense of how it works, the procedure, and it's very formal, and it's very structured, and it's got a lot of rules. And so, you could imagine if you were really, really good at a certain game board, and everything on the inside cover of the box, the game boards that come in a box, they always have the rules on the inside cover. If you memorized every single one of those rules and you became masterful at playing that game, whatever it is, Monopoly, anything, and somebody said, you're a good game board player, try this other game, this new game. It's also a game board, but it's going to have a completely different set of rules. Maybe some are similar, of course, rules about fairness and how you do things. But by and large, there's going to be a lot that you have to sort of remaster. And so I am in that process, and I'm not saying that as a comment on, my humility that I have a lot to learn, but we all always are learning, right? All of us, no matter what we're doing. And this is an interesting time for me, of course, being immersed in trying to master on your behalf, on behalf of my own constituents, master those rules so that I can be as efficient as possible in getting what we need delivered to Senate District 15, to the County of Santa Clara, to the City of Cupertino, and to the 14 other cities in this county, as well as the rest of the state of California. So that's kind of what I'm up to. If you want to know what the flavor of it is, am I enjoying it? Yes. Is it a lot of work? Absolutely. And you haven't been to Sacramento lately unless you've had to go there for business, I'm sure. If you've been up there in the past lobbying or with a field trip with a bunch of kids or anything like that, nothing like that right now. The Capitol itself has barricades around it. There's armed security around it at all times. Nobody goes in and out except a maximum of one staff person per office and one legislator. And we are extremely discouraged or dissuaded from going in and out of the building unless we have activities going on in there that are essential. If you're following Cupertino or county politics and government, you know that by virtue of a relaxation of the open meeting laws, those meetings can be handled all by Zoom like this. Not so at the Capitol. We are still meeting on the floor of the Capitol. 6 feet apart. There's all kinds of protocols in place. We're still meeting in committees. I was in a committee meeting for 5.5 hours, I think, yesterday afternoon after a 4 session that lasted about an hour and a half. So that part of it is still happening, but you'd almost never know it if you were just walking by on the sidewalk and there's nobody else walking around except for you in Sacramento right now. If you're doing that and you're looking over at the Capitol, it looks like nothing's going on at all, but a lot of work is going on the inside. And of course, rebuilding our economy, getting things opened up is still front and center. The governor was granted the opportunity to assert a little bit more control over budget during the pandemic before I got there, and still maintains a lot of that power under the declared emergency of the state of California. He maintains those powers to act much more swiftly in terms of appropriating dollars. And what you're starting to see now, or we're starting to see with this legislature that I'm now a part of in this session that just started a couple months ago, is the Senate and the Assembly really starting to assert themselves once again a lot more than they have over the last year or so in terms of appropriations, in terms of trying to weigh in and dictate, where money goes, how's it spent, and where it's prioritized. The reopening schools legislation that was just passed yesterday on a floor vote, and if it hasn't been signed into law yet, it will be any moment now, I'm sure, by the governor. Appropriated $4.6 billion in terms of dollars that need to go out now, right now, to help alleviate concerns with our kids, with our school kids, in terms of bringing them back. It's another $2 billion on top of that to assist the schools and the school districts in terms of facilitating the reopening. That's $2 billion, but another 4.6 on top of that to deal with some of the social emotional issues, some of the issues with regard to impact on the students themselves, and of course protections for the students. So the legislature did not just tell the governor, go ahead and use your emergency powers and figure out how that should be done, but spent hours and hours and hours, subcommittees, leadership in the legislature, and ultimately the legislature as a whole weighing in and saying, this is how that needs to be done. This is how we strike a balance between local control. We have good school board members. We have good superintendents. We have good districts in the state of California that know what they're doing. We don't want to usurp their control, but we want to complement that and give them the tools that they need. And we're all aware of the slippage of kids falling behind, the psychological impact on our children and adults during this pandemic. So that's what that's all about. All areas where the legislature feels like, through our own experience and through our responsibility to all of you as elected officials, we have something to say about that, and we're starting to do that. Something a little closer to home, maybe for some of you, except the ones who are very involved in schools, landlord tenant support, relief support. That bill was signed into law a couple weeks back. The Senate portion of that was called SB 91. That is going to provide about $2 billion plus in terms of landlord tenant relief. That money will actually go to landlords, but only for the purpose of assisting their own tenants in catching up on delinquent rent. And that's for tenants who have previously declared that they have COVID impact and have notified the landlord of that, and of course are delinquent on their rent and need assistance. I'm not sure that $2 billion is going to be enough based on what we're understanding to be the problem out there. But the moratorium on evictions was extended through June to allow some time to get this program out and rolled out and to get dollars out there. Counties like ours, which are over 500,000 in population, are administering those funds through county government, through your board of supervisors. Counties which are outside our area that are under 500,000 in population, just in case you have business interests there, or you're a landlord in another county, if they're under 500 in population, 500,000, then the state will be administering those programs. But it's going to be a real test, I think, to the governor's leadership and to the state's ability to implement, to get that money out to the right people on time, and to deal with whatever confusion arises in terms of trying to settle landlord disputes, or make tenants understand and landlords understand exactly what's available to them in trying to settle up, past due accounts. We don't, I don't want anyone to think, because I certainly don't think, being heavily experienced in real estate and rental properties myself in my own life, in my own past and current life, that in any way, shape, or form are we out of the woods, because that just because we passed a bill that says the money is now going out to the people it needs to get to. Let's see how it gets out, how that gets implemented, and how people are made whole. And I think we're going to need mediation programs that are able to step in and settle disputes where necessary, and other forms of assistance, like beefed up call centers, if you don't mind that term, that can handle inquiries from people on the landlord and tenant side about how to deal with that kind of assistance. So these are things that are going on real time. I think the good news about COVID overall is, sure, just like today from our esteemed city manager, you'll hear from Sarah Cody, you'll hear from the public health officer, Dr. Galley at the state of California. Here's what tier we're in, wear your mask, keep testing, and we do need to do those things. The vaccine rollout, though, is really going to be dictating reopening now, and it's happening faster and with much better traction and much greater quantity and volume than just a couple of weeks ago. It is clear that a lot of the questions about open schools or not, some of which is at local control, for example, open businesses or not, which businesses are safe, thankfully, a lot of that is going to be in the rearview mirror. We're still talking about it, and we're still preoccupied about it because people are still hurting. But no, I've been at the front lines of this politically as a county supervisor for the last year in governmentally. I was for a while there the biggest pessimist in the world about this pandemic, but I will say to you now, we are definitely seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and I would even go further than that and say, be prepared, for a fully open economy sooner rather than later, because this vaccine rollout has a lot of political will behind it right now and a lot of resources behind it right now. So I think I should probably kind of stop there, other than to say to you that, I have focused a lot of my attention, aside from the things I already talked about, that a lot of us are focused on. I have focused a lot of my legislative attention in my own bill package in areas involving housing and economic development, and also on the climate side. We have some justice reform legislation that's significant, and some gender violence and domestic violence and trafficking legislation I think is significant. But I do want you to know that one of my bills, SB 91, calls for the creation of a housing finance agency at the state level, or a department within the current agency, which will facilitate through tax credits and incentives, including credit enhancements. People at Mayor West probably know what that means, but the kind of credit backing that will reduce interest rates for housing developers, especially affordable housing developers, and local agencies like the city of Cupertino or the city of Campbell or the city of San Jose, who have surplus property that they would like to put into play for housing, but maybe don't have the bonding capacity or all the partners they need to put that deal together. So SB 91 will facilitate that. That's my bill. And then also, not very glamorous, but something that anyone involved in housing understands, again, including the city manager. There's something on the books in the state of California called EIFD. Those are financing districts that can be set up to finance the infrastructure that you need to support development of commercial and residential housing. They have not been used much. They were kind of a second priority behind redevelopment money when redevelopment existed. And now that developers are trying to go back and use this other tool, this financing district tool, which also allows them to take properties in a certain area, and if there's mutual agreement, to self-assess on the tax roll to build the financial infrastructure, not the financial, the physical infrastructure, the public works infrastructure, could be street and road improvements or whatever, to get a green light on a housing issue. That bill, I think, which is SB 780 for anybody who's really curious about the details of it, is not a mandate. It doesn't force anybody to do anything. It doesn't even get anywhere near interfering with local control. But at the same time, it would allow a community like Cupertino on a self-help basis to say, hey, we have a group of developers here that want to self-assess, to partner with the city to get the infrastructure done so we can move a project forward today and not have to wait 5 or 10 years to do that. So that's some of what I'm working on. I have been included in a small leadership group of senators who are shepherding through housing bills. The Senate President, Tony Atkins, has asked me to be one of 6 senators who convenes in special meetings with her to try to make sure that the rest of the housing bills that need to move forward this session actually move forward and don't get hung up or held back. So those are some things I'll be working on, among others. And for the second time, I'll say I'm going to stop there, but this time I'm really going to stop there and open it up for questions. Thanks, Rick.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you, Celeste. Celeste posted the info link to SB 791 in the chat, which is also one of the ways people can ask questions. If you want to raise your hand in the reactions button at the bottom right of your Zoom screen, you can do that. If you, raise your hand and I'll call on you, or if you just indicate that you have a question in the chat, I will call on you that way. Okay, so let's give people a moment. Well, Dave, you had talked a little bit about the differences between local government and state government. With that transition, have you also, what are some of the issues that are nearest and dearest that have survived that transition with you? I mean, you have history in education. Is that going to be one of your standards?
Yeah, we have some legislation involving education, for example, right now. It's actually, so to answer your question about differences in transition, sure, I had the opportunity, as I said, to work on education issues to some degree as a county supervisor. I brought the initiative last year to put $7.2 million in county money up county-wide to close the digital divide for families who, due to poverty and other reasons, don't have Wi-Fi, don't have devices for their kids. I mean, it's hard to have your kids distance learning if they can't connect, right? Those issues, though, at the state, of course, are kind of wide open. I mean, there's, this is the first time since I was a school board member years ago where really the full spectrum of education issues are on the table for me. So that's, excuse me, that's very, very much of interest to me in a good way, right? That's a great opportunity transition-wise. I have a bill that we are doing that is sponsored by the Santa Clara County Office of Education to a statewide bill to mandate inclusion of the special ed kids in mainstream, classroom instruction. It was decades ago, because of racial segregation, that Thurgood Marshall, who of course later became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, said separate is always unequal, meaning it causes trauma, it causes impact, huge impact when you segregate children away from each other in our school system, especially if it's absolutely unnecessary or done, for reasons that end up stigmatizing the kids. That bill, SB 739, says don't do that anymore. You can't do that anymore. Everybody, that's why it's called an inclusion bill. Everybody has the right to the same space in terms of their education and the same opportunities. So it's an example of, Rick, of something on the education side, for example, that I get to work on, that even though the county office of education is involved with that bill, we could have really never done anything real significant at the county level. We didn't have the jurisdiction over an issue like that there. And please, anyone has questions, if anyone has questions on issues outside of what I've brought up, more than welcome. Don't feel like you have to ask a question about something that I just spoke about. I may have missed the target completely. There may be a million other things you would have rather had heard me talk about. So please feel free to ask questions on anything.
All right. Any questions? This is usually a very inquisitive group, so I'm surprised it's so quiet. Oh, there you go,
Rick,
Louis.
Rick, the rest of the state is finding out about EDD, which has been a problem for business owners for a long time. Something I brought up actually in this forum, trying to deal with them. Is there any hope that we can get a department that can actually take a phone call and respond to an individual problem at some point? Probably not fair to ask you in your first moments of being a state senator, but can you offer us any reason for optimism there?
Well, it's totally fair, but I do appreciate you acknowledging that. I kind of inherited that issue to somebody as a policymaker. And the legislature was, I think, in kind of a backed off position with regard to EDD originally, because it's on the management side, right? It's not over in the legislature. It's not public policy. It's not the kind of normal things where you get in there and tell them how to do things. They're just supposed to do their job, and they're not. And I've stood up both in budget committee and on the Senate floor, and not only been critical, but I called for the state auditor to be embedded in the EDD on a daily basis. They gave us an audit a couple of weeks ago and said, well, we'll be back there in 6 months to look at them again. My reaction was, 6 months? Are you kidding me? Go back tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and get in there and keep, not only auditing when you've got some significant level of fraud that's gone on, but also management audit them, because obviously they don't know what they're doing. It's a horrendous situation. I think Celeste is still on the line. I want you to know I've been critical. I want you to know that the committee that I chair, which is Labor, Employment, and Retirement, has some jurisdiction over EDD, meaning they need to come to us ultimately, as well as the budget subcommittee I'm on, which to a large degree oversees their appropriations. So I'm on it. I don't have any patience left with it. They basically came through and acknowledged that they needed 900 more employees, to respond to phone calls that they don't have, and they want to hire them. They said, we'll be done hiring by the end of May. And I said, pull people, remote workers out of other state agencies and put them on those phones in the call center now. You can't let people starve and wait for benefits and be frustrated, and to add insult to injury, what they've been doing, and this precedes my tenure. This goes back to, I felt sorry for the staff and for Senator Bell when I found out this was happening under his watch as well. They basically said, well, we can get about 600 staff people to help us by pushing this down to the legislative offices, right? Let's get those Celeste Walkers of the world to answer these calls for us. And, they've essentially, I think, intended to turn the staff that is supposed to be responding to constituent inquiries for folks like the Chamber of Commerce on a variety of issues into almost full-time EDD liaisons. And Celeste, if you want to just maybe speak for a minute or two to give them a flavor for what it's been like, you know, just what kind of volume you're really dealing with and how hard it's been. And you know, you don't need to defend EDD here, Celeste.
I certainly won't. No, I am a carryover from Senator Bell's office. So my job title, job description completely changed in March of last year. And many of my days since then have been full-time dealing with thousands of EDD constituent issues, many of which have taken months to resolve, and some that I inherited from my last Senate job. I've carried over into this office. We're given very little resources or means to interact, to actually liaise and facilitate resolutions for constituents. And frankly, by the time they get to us, it's because they have become so frustrated with trying to interact with the EDD on their own, that they're really frustrated and angry and frankly desperate, many of them, because of the financial position that they're in.
Thank you, Celeste. And that gives you a flavor. She's not understating the problem, but you know, even to this day, I mean, she gave me a memo a couple of days ago that said, I'm happy to report that we're down by a third in terms of caseload in the office. That's because she's down from 100 to about 66 active constituent cases that she's constantly having to essentially pester EDD, for lack of a better word, but in a very formal way, of course, to get action for people that, you know, these are not fraud cases. Is, you know, maybe there's one or two sneaking in there, people who are trying to job the system, but these active cases have already been vetted by Celeste to some degree. And the EDD doesn't necessarily turn these down because they're suspicious, but because they've got a lockdown system that's not working. You know, and then I think some of you know they contracted out with the Bank of America, and then as a third-party administrator to try to speed things up, and then turned right around and, you know, froze thousands and thousands of accounts, and told the bank not to proceed anymore, and threw that whole contract into a quandary. So yeah, this is going to be a constant legislative effort now to try to right that ship, and it, more importantly, that pattern cannot be predictive of what happens with landlord tenant money or with the rest of the vaccine rollout or anything else that the state's doing, because it's bad enough on the EDD side, and we just can't have systemic problems like that anymore in the middle of a pandemic, getting resources to people. Thanks for asking the question.
Thank you. And I know from other legislative offices, someone I was speaking with, their staff just kind of shrugged and said, "Oh, I work for EDD now." That's it's
as a business person myself, you know, by background, and you know, as some of you know, to some degree, currently still involved with my own business interests. I think your basic upbringing as a business person is so contra to having somebody come in like this and essentially usurp your staff. I just want to acknowledge that comment somebody made to you, Rick. It isn't, we get it. Our staff works for the same people that EDD is trying to work for, right? Their constituents. Believe you me, if they weren't our constituents, if they tried to do this on, you know, to help some other agency or some huge private sector corporation or something like that, I'd put an end to it immediately, and Celeste or none of us would be spending an hour on it. But as you could tell from her compassion, they've really put us in a situation where if we say no, that's totally violative of any kind of a business model and a business principle to come in and borrow or usurp legislative staff for over a year to deal with these issues, and we put a stop to it, which we could, who really gets shortchanged? It's the folks that Celeste has been trying to help. So that's the dilemma. And at least we're very motivated, to get past it, to get beyond it. So we'll keep working on it.
Great. Any other questions for the senator?
I have one on housing. Dave, you spoke about, really looking at affordable housing. Can you give us a few specifics as to what you're doing that you think can have some immediate impact in removing or decreasing the homeless population that we're seeing growing around our community?
Great question. And again, an area where I've obviously spent a lot of time on the local governmental level. I co-chaired the Measure A campaign for the county in 2016, which was the $950 million bond. And that's actually on track and doing a good job at the county level of, rolling out the construction of permanent supportive housing. Probably more than half of that goes into San Jose because of their population and their homeless problem. But as you all know, we've had issues in Cupertino, right on De Anza Boulevard with homelessness. I was intervening with that, in December, trying to get relief. We have been emphasizing with the governor's office that we need larger buckets of investment for short-term shelter. You've heard of Project Room Key and Project Home Key. Those were early efforts by the governor to get people, at least get them out of creeks and underpasses and overpasses and into temporary shelter while they're waiting for permanent supportive housing to be built or funded. But right now, the amount of dollars and the speed at which that work is being done is not good enough. And we've got to accelerate that. On the legislative side, I believe you will see a successful streamlined accessory dwelling unit bill. I don't think it'll be too scary to folks. I think it's basically going to say, if that's all you're trying to do, you should be exempt from Subdivision Map Act and some of the rules that otherwise slow you down. You will see there is a housing bond bill introduced at the Senate level, and it's one of the ones that the 6 senators that I'm a part of, Senate Pro Tem with the President of the Senate, we are shepherding that along. And that's the kind of big investment that's going to have to be necessary, kind of like what we did at Santa Clara County, but extend that state at a larger level and spur more investment. You will see a number of efforts to allow tax credits, financing, and to put other property into play, which really hasn't been put into play, whether it's surplus property, on a voluntary basis by some of the cities and counties and special districts and agencies. No one's going to tell them you have to put your surplus property in play, but the idea is to say, if you have it and you want to put it in play for housing, let us create the financial vehicles. You would understand that as a lender, let's put the financial vehicles in play to help make that happen, right? But make the state more of an active participant in underwriting and financing the deals that need to be financed, whether it's VTA property that's sitting there vacant or some other piece of property here or in Los Angeles or wherever that could go into housing right now if we just put a few more incentives and sweeteners in place. So those are the kinds of things that you're going to see. I guarantee you, you will see action this year legislatively. You may not agree with every single aspect of it, but action is the operative word right now. And this Senate Pro Tem, this Senate leader, Toni Atkins, she considers the housing issue her number one issue and her number one objective. I mean, heard her virtually say, if nothing else were to come out of this legislative session, the housing bills need to come out and signed into law. So you'll see better things happening, or you'll see action happening, which in and of itself is an improvement over the last couple of years.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick?
It's just about 1:30. Maybe a chance for one last question for the senator.
This is Colleen. I would like to ask a question.
Go ahead.
Yes, hi, Senator Cortese. I would like to ask, there are several groups running, like recalling the governor news and situation. What's your view on that?
Oh, recall of the governor, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, my view is, I'm a Democrat. I have some moderate views on business issues, I suppose, but I'm generally a Democrat who has a lot of priorities and values aligned with the governor. I think the governor's got to do a better job at implementation. You've heard a lot, all of you, woven into my comments, a lot of frustration about not the intentionality, but the implementation, right? Is it good to get landlord tenant relief out there? Yes, good. But you got to get it to where it's needed, and you got to get it there fast, and you got to get it there without confusion. We just heard about EDD. That was not acceptable. What I think is happening out there, so I support the governor because I support his values, but my understanding is that the recall effort is close to qualifying with enough signatures. I think it will. So I think it's likely we'll see a recall campaign, and the governor's going to have to get out there and defend his track record. What I would say in his defense and everyone's defense right now, with the possible exception of EDD, here's a governor that came out with a strategy for huge investments in homelessness, in housing, in education, and in climate, and really had to temporarily derail all of that because the legislative analysts in the budget office last year at this time predicted a $54 billion deficit in the state. And so he did the prudent thing and pulled back. I mean, that's good management to say, we may not have the money, or we aren't going to have the money, so let's pull back. So he did the right thing and a fairly conservative thing fiscally, and hit the brake pedal and said, slow down, we got to slow down spending. Now, as it turns out, because of all of the great efforts of all of you in the business community, people have stayed employed, income taxes have been paid, property taxes have stayed up, sales taxes have dropped off a little bit, but overall, the state is actually in good shape in terms of its budget. So I hope he gets a chance to finish out the agenda that he was trying to launch, because I'd really like to see most of that happen. But he's going to have a tough time, of course, if there is in fact a recall election.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Thank you, Dave, for your time, and appreciations to your staff for helping us set this up. Celeste has posted your contact information in the chat, and we'll make sure that continues to be available.
Yes, absolutely. She's got everything there, including my email, which is great. So you can email me, you can email Celeste. It's all there, and we would love to hear from you anytime. And I want you to know Cupertino is a huge priority for us, a huge priority. Don't feel like just because I have some background as a San Jose council member or at the county level, that's where my thoughts are. My thoughts are to learn everything I can about your needs and do everything I can to help you from the state level. So please let us know how we can help week by week for the next few years. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Great. Thank you.
Great. So the next item on the agenda is, Alex, are you still there? We're going to have a discussion on broadband, as we heard Senator Cortese talk about the digital divide. Bandwidth, digital access is a big issue, and certainly we would expect that to be something that needs to be discussed. To that end, Alex, do you want to?
Thanks, Rick. Hopefully you
step
can hear
up?
me okay.
Yeah.
Again, really appreciate the opportunity. I know we're running a little short on time, and so I want to be sensitive to that. And it's good to see folks. I do see some familiar faces from my recent and not so recent past here, so it's nice to see everyone again. What I wanted to do is talk a little bit about wireless infrastructure and 5G and some of the things that we're working on and some of the challenges that I think we're facing here in Cupertino, but frankly, all over the Valley. And so, just a little bit, not everyone is an expert on this stuff, and it is a little bit technical, and I'll try to, walk through this in the best way I can. And I do invite people to feel free to interrupt with questions. I want this to be conversational. So, when you think of cellular technology, like you think of those big, large towers, the ones they sometimes disguise like trees or other things. I think there's actually a really good example of that on the Cupertino City Hall property, actually. But as we started building more and more of those in the 4G era, we realized that because of the the technology and the devices that 4G was enabling, we saw a dramatic increase in data usage. And so what we started doing was building what we call small cells, 4G small cells. And these large towers that I described previously, they are meant to be coverage overlay. They are the main umbrella of coverage, if you will, that provides the voice and then limited data connectivity. And again, we saw this first in large cities like San Francisco and elsewhere, that you have a lot of phones together and a lot of other devices using internet capacity, and all of a sudden you might look like you have 3 or 4 bars, but calls don't go through, things aren't downloading. And so we started building small cells, and small cells, like the name implies, these are smaller, lower powered wireless facilities, typically located in the right of way on either utility poles or street poles. The optimum height for these facilities is between 20 and 30 feet, whereas a macro is, can be as much as 100 feet high. And so as we've moved into the 5G era, the spectrum that encompasses 5G is tremendously broad, and there's different flavors of 5G, if you will. You see a lot of ads now from, I think, Verizon, but also T-Mobile and others talking about nationwide 5G. And that's not what I'm talking about here when it comes to small cells. That's a flavor of 5G. That's the low band 5G. It's often a software update to our existing macro facilities. And the performance, to be transparent, is similar and maybe slightly better than our 4G LTE, but not dramatically different. And what, if you've seen Verizon's ads, you've seen 5G done right, or the term ultra wideband. And that's what we're talking about when we mean transformative cellular technology. And that's what we're seeking and trying to bring to Cupertino. That technology is going to be very, very dependent on these small cells. And that comes down to essentially the different wavelengths that are used in this 5G spectrum. And so this is a very high gigahertz spectrum for the ultra wideband, which means that it's a very fast wave. It carries a ton of data, which is great. The latency is extremely low, which is really good for applications like autonomous vehicles, remote surgery, things like that, where you want kind of a quick reaction to whatever you're doing. But one thing that is a problem is the propagation of the signal. Radio waves, they don't carry a lot of data, but they travel hundreds of miles. This is the exact opposite of that. This is why we need to locate small cells to really build this network. And so as we built 4G out, and these small cells, it really sort of built the backbone on which the 5G network is going to be built. And so we've been working with cities throughout the last few years to get master license agreements and essentially install this infrastructure in the right of way, both in commercial and industrial areas as well as residential. Because one of the real benefits of this ultra wideband wireless technology is that it's not just about your cell phone anymore. Because of the amount of data and the speeds that the data travels that this technology can carry, we're looking at being able to provide a new option for home and small business broadband, fixed broadband, doing it wirelessly. So instead of having to trench cable or fiber to your home or run it aerially from a pole, if that's where it's located, you would actually be beaming that gigabit signal into your home from the nearest small cell, and then that would propagate out through Wi-Fi just like it would if you had a hard fiber drop. So it's a real transformational technology just in terms of providing more options and competition for the incumbent home broadband market. But I will say that it's difficult to cite this infrastructure. People see stuff coming into their neighborhood, and they're understandably, they have questions. And we've seen in many cities, there's been efforts to restrict, in a myriad ways, restrict the siting of this infrastructure. And there are federal guidelines in place as far as what local jurisdictions can and can't do. Some local jurisdictions have decided to thumb their nose at those requirements. I think there's a few cities out there in the Bay Area that have essentially banned 5G, and some of them are going through, unfortunately, other issues because of that. But what I will say is that the more information gets out about this, the more we find people are interested in this. And so, while it is controversial, I would say that it's important for you in the business community to let folks, at City Hall and other levels of government know that this is critical infrastructure. There is certainly a very committed and loud minority of folks that have questions about this technology. There's a lot of misinformation online. I think if you go to Facebook, you could find that pretty quick, about supposed impacts of wireless technology. And it's an emotional issue for people. People are really invested in this. And so these people are motivated, and your elected officials are hearing from them often. And so I'm here, again, thank you, Rick and Anjali, for having me here. I'm here to urge you to make your voices heard as well. If, broadband infrastructure is important to you, important to your business, important to your family, this is something that folks in government need to know. So, let me just put it this way. I'm here, we're all here over Zoom. We've seen a massive growth in demand for broadband, both on the phone and at fixed locations over the last year. And even though we're hopefully coming out of this pandemic, my parents, both in their 80s, just got their second shots, and I'm thrilled for them. And I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think from everything I've seen is that we're not going to suddenly go back to the way it was in 2019 as far as business practices. What I'm seeing from large employers, from small employers, is that remote work is going to remain with us in some form or another for a long time, probably in perpetuity. Businesses are starting to rethink the purpose of an office. Is this a place where you're spending all your time in your own space? Or are you going there for a purpose, for a meeting, or to use a certain facility, and then maybe the rest of your week you're actually working from a home office? I think that's a model that we're going to see a lot more of. And so I think this demand and need for robust, stable home broadband and small business broadband is going to continue. And so that's why, even if we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with this, and maybe our kids are going back to school, and I hope mine are soon, because I've got 3 at home here and it's difficult. I'm probably going to still be working from home, and I think there's thousands, if not millions, of others throughout Northern California like me. And so I think the real need is there. And I would hate for the loudest and most committed folks to have have sway over an issue that could have long-term implications for the community. So let me just stop there. I'm happy to entertain any questions about any aspect of this. If I don't have an answer from you, I can certainly make sure that smarter colleagues of mine at Verizon can provide those to you through Rick and Anjali. So again, really thank you for the opportunity, and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Alex. And Alex, if there's any particular contact information that you want to share, if you could put that up on the chat, we could be sure that not just people today, but others who have questions about what's happening in the industry or with the company. We have enough time for me.
Right in here. I'll throw my email right that'd be great. Into the chat, and feel free to contact me. Thank you, Rick.
Great. Any questions for Alex while we have him here? What he's talking about is not new. Cupertino actually has had two different light pole franchises. One was, I think, Metrocom back in the late 90s. It was a proprietary system. And then we had a free Wi-Fi, I think that was MetroFi, that was also around. And there's always this push me, pull you dynamic where there's a concern about the new technology, but also this incredible demand and frustration that Cupertino ends up being a type of desert, either for transit or Wi-Fi, broadband access. It's not a new problem, but certainly if there's a new flavor of that problem for us. Any hands or questions? We see Alex contact info. Hearing none. Thank you, Alex, for joining us.
Rick, if I can, I'll just say and that the City Council has scheduled a study session to look at this issue of infrastructure, of wireless infrastructure siting and location. That's scheduled currently for April 20th. Like I said, I know that folks who have strong feelings on the other side of this will be there. And so I would urge you that if this is an issue that's important to you and your business, to hop on Zoom as well and make your voice heard as well, so that folks at City Hall know that this is an important issue.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Great. Next, Angela Sway. Are you still here? There we go. Hey, Angela. Oops. No, I can't hear you. Can anyone, I can't hear Angela. I don't know if that's just me.
No, we can't hear her.
No.
You might have to shout out your window.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Dennis. Do you want to sign off and try to come back on, see if that helps?
Or check your computer setting.
Okay, great. While Angela is taking time to reconfigure, does anyone have any, oh, here she's back. Any announcements? No, let's try again.
Okay, can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, I apologize. Something happened between my introduction and now. I will make this brief, and if you don't mind, I will share my screen to show you all the development matrix. And per usual, things that are highlighted in gray have recent activities. So as you may recall, the council approved the mobile vendors ordinance. And the next step would be to take a look at motorized vending. And again, that would be the food trucks and just the larger vendors, mobile vendors. But again, specifically motorized. Westport Oaks, they submitted for offsite improvement plans. And then on the next page, the forum, again, their villas of 16 of the 23 have been finalized. And then the last item is the bird safe and dark sky ordinance. And that's scheduled to go back to City Council on the 16th of this month. And I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has anything. And again, you can always view this online on the city's website under the business tab. And if you look on the left-hand side, you'll be able to choose the development activity reports.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Angela? Quiet, no, not a lot of hand raisers today. It must be Friday. Okay, great. Any questions? No. Angela, while I have you, do you know if there is any effort to revisit and refresh the Economic Development Strategic Plan? It's a wonderful document that you brought to fruition many, many years ago. And we'd love to keep using it.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So as you know, these, actually with many plans, once you kind of make it public, it's probably outdated at some point. And so again, for an EDSP and Economic Development Strategic Plan, it does need to be refreshed, but there are probably very salient points that we can point back to. With the pandemic, a lot of the statistics and data we had for businesses probably, again, has to be refreshed and relooked at. And so there are some council work program items that will be touching upon things that were covered in the Economic Development Strategic Plan. I believe we have still on listed is a study session on taking a look at diversified or retail diversification or additional types of uses. So that is something that we will definitely look to council for direction to continue studying and, again, reaching out to the public and to businesses and of course the chamber to get all of your input on that. So at this point, that's kind of the next step or how we would be using the EDSP.
Right. Yeah. For those of you who haven't, it's actually a impressive document. I guess it's hard to say that with any level of enthusiasm about a public report, but it's a good document. It's a great look at the kind of the nuts and bolts of our local Cupertino economy. Well, great. With that and no further ado and no questions, let's call it a day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and happy Friday. Be safe, get your vaccine, and stay out of trouble and don't get caught. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rick. Bye-bye.